Do you play poker and often ask yourself, man, how much should I have bet? This video is gonna give you the answer to that. The way I'm gonna structure this video is I'm gonna start with beginner material when it comes to bet sizing and explain to you guys how I started thinking about bet sizing some years ago, what is still solid advice, and then I'm gonna move on to more complex and advanced situations where I'm gonna dive into PIO Solver and then show you how a computer approaches bet sizing in a more advanced manner. So stay tuned if you think this is too easy at first. It's gonna get more complex throughout this video. Up to 2017, everyone agreed on bet sizing and that it's mainly about two things: A, betting for value, or B, betting as a bluff. I'm gonna show you in a quick chart here what you can basically think about when you want to bet as a bluff or bet for value. So here I got a chart from pokerbonus.com. If you end up on the river, you either have the best hand, aka 100% of equity, or the worst hand, 0% of equity. So you then have to pick one of the bet sizes, which are half pot, 2/3, 3/4, and 1, and then ask yourself, for example, if you pick half pot, is it going to work 33% or more when I bet half pot? If the answer to that is yes, you absolutely want to pick that sizing. However, you could also maybe pick a better sizing. If you want to ask yourself, okay, if I bet pot here, which is standing for this one, then the question is it going to work 50% or more? And then some players, they're going to fall to a pot size bet maybe 60, 70, 80% of the time, but to half pot almost never. Then that is called being elastic to bet sizing. So that means that you as a poker player have to find out, okay, which sizing is going to work at this moment against my opponent the best? Which one is going to be the most efficient right now to choose? And you can basically do this with this chart. The decision is going to be mostly easier for you when you're holding a bluff. Because on the river, when you have 8 high and your opponent now raises, calls, or folds, the action is over. It's going to be more difficult when you're holding a medium strength hand, such as top pair with a weak kicker. Because then, if you bet, put in more money into the pot, your opponent could actually check raise bluff you and get you off the best hand, and you could have just checked it back and basically won the pot. A lot of players are afraid of that happening, and that's why they end up not value betting a lot or value betting less than they should. Now the question for value betting is really simple. If you want to put in a value bet, for example with top pair and the medium kicker, then you have to ask yourself, is my opponent going to call my bet with worse hands 50% or more? So if he calls you with 50% of more worse hands, and if he's not raising you a lot off the best hand, then you put in a value bet, for example, for half pot. So in the end, a lot of beginner mistakes, to point that out, is that when they have a bluff, they end up maybe betting too small. So you just have to pick one of those bet sizes that I've just shown you. Or when they have a medium strength hand, they end up randomly betting some amount, and then they get check raised and then they don't know what to do. And then their value bet is actually not even legit because they would only be called by, for example, 30% worse hands. And when their opponents calls otherwise, they're always beat. So they don't know where that threshold is, where they should start value betting a hand and where not. And finding that threshold is basically your task when you want to improve at poker. So let's sum it up. What you should have learned from this video so far is A, you can bet for value or bet as a bluff. That's really beginner bet sizing 101. And then you have to choose a bet size that works the best against your opponent, following that chart and how much they're folding. And then last but not least, if you have a value hand or you might want to value bet, then you have to ask yourself, is my opponent going to continue with worse hands often enough for me to value bet? Finding that threshold is your task in poker. Oh, you guys still here? Well, I guess you're hungry for some more
knowledge.
Well, congratulations for sticking around. We're gonna dive into more advanced stuff from this point on. We're gonna go into PIO Solver analysis and see what we can do for bet sizing. Here you can see a situation where we raised on the button with this range. Okay, this is all the hands we raised on the button. You can pause the video if you want to see the exact range. Then, this is gonna be the defense range. You can see that the black ones would have been 3-betting. You can also pause again. And then we're gonna end up with this analysis, or this bet sizing choice by PIO Solver. You can see that I've selected 3 bet sizes: third pot, bet 2 into 6, half pot, and 2/3 pot as our bet sizing choices. We could also go a bit bigger and bet 3/4 or even pot size, but I've simplified it just with these 3 bet sizes. Now the board texture is queen 7-5 with 2 spades, and when our opponent checks his range to us, because we have more equity, we have 53% of equity against his 46% of equity with the entire range, then we also have a lot more EV because we have a polarity advantage, meaning we have bigger green hands here. The green hands, they have the highest EV, they generate the most money. And you can see that top set, pocket queens, middle set, pocket sevens, and bottom set are obviously our strongest holdings here. And our opponent, when he is out of position, he has only pocket sevens and pocket fives, so he doesn't have as many hands. Also, we're gonna have a lot of over pairs and top pair, top kickers that, you know, our opponent has a little bit less of. So the EV of the pot is gonna be 3.7 out of 6, so we almost capture 2/3 of the entire pot here. Now, the strategy and EV, you can see when we hover over individual hands, they're gonna be much different. You can see that the red, the more red the hand is, the more it wants to bet. Now the hands that are most popular to bet here are top set. You can see that it's always betting either for third, half, or 2/3 pot when we give him those choices. You know, he solved it for us. And then pocket kings is almost always betting. But when we go to pocket aces, then it's all already checking quite a bit. You can see that in the green part. Which are the worst hands of betting? The worst hands of betting are, for example, ace-10 offsuit. And then it also depends on suits, which you can see here on the right. When you, for example, have a spade in your hand, ace of spades with a 10 of hearts, then it makes a lot more sense to bet it. Why? Because your opponent is going to check raise you less if you have the ace of spades. That means you're blocking your opponent's check raising range. Okay, but when you have the, for example, ace of hearts and the 10 of spades, then he's gonna check raise you not that much differently because the 10 of spades doesn't connect as well with the check raising range. Meaning, okay, he could have 10 jack of spades in those hands, but you're actually not blocking, for example, the 9-8 of spades or the 8-6 of spades, which have a flush draw plus a gut shot, thus more playability for future streets and would check raise you more often for that reason. What are other hands that are pretty inefficient to bet? Well, one of them is pocket jacks. Pocket jacks does not have many cards that you know, it's dangerous to give a free card against. For example, if you check back and it turns an ace or a king, well, that's not good for pocket jacks, but it's good for a lot of other hands such as ace-10 offsuit, or for example, you could also have some ace-king highs, but particularly the ace turn, it's going to be okay for the rest of your range that you're not betting. For example, you're going to have a lot of ace highs. The king is obviously not that great because your opponent can improve, but he also could be still behind and you can then, you know, still go to showdown quite a bit. However, if you go down to a slightly smaller pair, which is pocket eights, it gets actually pretty good to bet it. Why? Because now the 10, the 9, and the jack are 3 overcards that will, you know, suffer. You make your hand much worse when you check it back. When you check back pocket eights on queen 7-5 and your opponent has jack 10 high and the turns a jack or a 10, that really sucks. So this hand probably would have folded if we had chosen either betting third, half, or 2/3 on the flop. So that's why pocket eights is going to be bet the majority of the time. You still, there's some checking. So the reason why this solver does it this way is that when we check back and the turn's an 8, that we're still gonna have that set quite a bit, so that we are actually okay-ish on that turn in the check back line. Now, I'm gonna have to warn you guys here. Working with solvers can be really making you play worse. Why is that? Well, if you work with a solver, the problem that you have that you look at those strategy grids and you think, oh, I can try to play like this, but this is not the way to go about it. A lot of players who have done this have then failed miserably trying to do so. Most players these days, what they're trying to do is they try to take the solver input that they have and simplify it. Because when you look at that grid, you say, okay, I should bet that 60% of the time and then check it 40% of the time. It's really not that simple, right? You'd have to use a randomizer. And for example, in live poker, that's almost impossible. Like it is possible in some sense. You can do it with suits, etc. But you know, in the end, you're gonna have to play a strategy that's implementable, and that's a much harder task to do. Now, how do you simplify that strategy? The way most people have gone about it is basically making clusters in their strategies. So let's have a look at the grid again. What they did is, for example, they said, okay, I'm just going to check back 10s and jacks always. And you know, my opponent is not going to be doing something about it if I just check back all the time. And then I'm going to check back ace 9 and ace 10 and ace 8 and ace jack suited all the time, except for when I have spades, and then I'm going to bet half of them and check half of them, and just mixing it a little bit. Also for these offsuit hands, the same thing, just betting it sometimes when you have the ace of spades and then checking some other times will be fair enough. And also when it comes to betting, you know, bet all your kings, mix it up a little bit with sizings, and also then don't just take 3 sizings, but for example, always make it simple to like 1 sizing, for example, 2/3 of the pot, and then run PIO Solver one more time and just, you know, basically make it a more pure strategy. You will see when you do that in PIO Solver, your EV will maybe go down a little bit because you selected a less complex strategy, a simplified strategy. And sure, it's not going to be as strong as the best strategy, which has all kinds of bet sizes from a quarter of the pot to overbetting 1.5 times the pot. And that goes the same way for turns and rivers. But, you know, we're humans. We don't want to make it too complex. And that's why we choose sometimes 1 or 2 sizings and make it more simple. Now, it's basically up to you. Do you want to just take the basic knowledge that you have from this video and basically not work with solvers and be okay with it and not, you know, push for the maximum and try to make better strategies for yourself? That's fine. You can still win a poker. You just have to look at what your opponent is doing and try to play well against it and try to basically exploit for what they're doing. However, if you want to become a better poker player, there's options that you have. You can work with PIO Solver yourself. And by the way, if you can't do that yourself, get a coach. I have some coaching offers on my website. You can find out that I work with Monka Solver for Pot Limit Omaha and with PIO Solver for Hold'em. If you want to know more about solver work and you work with someone, you can't do it yourself, give me a PM and then we can figure out something how can help you get better with this kind of work. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit those thumbs up down there and subscribe to the channel. There's be more to come. And I know that especially with the second part, for some of you guys, it might have been a little bit fast, but I wanted to basically push out a lot of value in this video and give it to you guys and how I think about poker and, you know, what I work on if I want to, you know, play a better strategy. Sometimes I'm also going to simplify things in a way that's not based on solvers and just try to play a strategy that's more or less okay because I think it's going to be good enough for the games that I'm playing. But in the games that I want to push myself to a higher limit, then I definitely have to do that solver work because I'm not naturally talented enough to just, you know, do it all without solvers. I think some players might be that, but there's a high chance that you're not, and I'm definitely not either. So if I want to become really good at poker, this is my approach, and I think there's nothing around it. And yeah, you can decide for yourself what you want to do. See you guys for the next one.